Welcome to another podcast episode of While I Wait, an Operation Plan Your Wedding podcast. Today, I am laughing because this season has been very interesting, and I know we Christians, believers, love to say season. I promise you, if somebody didn't understand, okay, how about this? I imagine that people who do not understand some of the vocabulary believers, Christians use would be like, y'all are always in a season. Like, yes, there are 4 seasons in a year if you live in a country with 4 seasons or however many you have, or if you only have one. But like, Christians are constantly talking about seasons. And I think it's funny, but I think there's so much truth to it because there's just so much that God is teaching us on this journey, this daily journey of salvation. And there are seasons that we're learning different lessons, sometimes repeating lessons, and just going through different processes that God wants us to go through to ultimately refine us and make us into His likeness and image. And today I was challenged, and today wasn't the first time I was being challenged. I was challenged with the thought of being a believer, being a Christian, and going to church on Sunday and being depleted or not having joy to share by Monday. And I was like, I have so many thoughts, right? Because my brain is constantly spinning. And as I'd imagine that most of us, we have so many things that we're thinking about, we're thinking through. But in that moment, I just decided to, as I often do, just sit with it like, okay, food for thought, lots of food for thought, unexpected food for thought. And there are different things that came up. I'm going to share how I am navigating that thought in my current season, because I believe it's something worth processing in our season, in my season of waiting. And I'd like to think that all of us at some point will have to process how we show up in the seasons of waiting. And as I mentioned in an earlier podcast episode, if you are a believer or identify yourself as a Christian, a child of God, we will always be waiting. Especially people who follow Jesus, we are always going to be waiting because we're ultimately waiting for the return of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, His second coming. So we're ultimately always going to be waiting. So how we navigate relationships, how we show up in the world while we wait is really crucial. In summary, I haven't been showing up in a way with this person in a way that made them feel that or know that I had joy. And part of me was like a little, not really confused, but a little confused in times past when I've been challenged about this. But today I didn't feel confused because I knew exactly what was going on and like why today was harder than any other day. And this person that we just have a conversation, and the way I am meeting them on that conversation on the phone is informing them perhaps that I'm not full of joy. And I was just like, okay, for one, this person doesn't know everything that's happening around me, but it seems like their insight to me is it doesn't matter what's happening, not because those things don't matter at all. Of course, they might affect us or affect me precisely, but I can still show up with joy. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. I could. But sometimes someone who is sometimes I think I'm a little too emotionally aware. And I don't think you can ever be too aware, but sometimes I am. And so sometimes I intentionally choose to show up with one emotion versus another, because I think for so long, especially given my culture, like how my Nigerian heritage influences the way I see the world or can affect the way I see the world. I come from a people who are constantly positive. Not that they aren't negative from time to time, but when you meet them, you ask them how everything, they'll literally tell you everything is good. They'll have the best pitch, have the best tone. you would not know what's happening in their world. And so I knew how to do that growing up, and I still know how to do it. But these days, I've intentionally refused to show up that way because I started to feel like it was inauthentic to the relationships that I was building because it didn't let people into my world. Because how can someone, support me when I need support if they're not allowed into that world? I started to realize, well, geez, Louise, somebody doesn't realize that I do know how to show up and pretend like nothing is happening in the world and just be like jolly and be like, hey, how's it going? Oh my gosh, it's great. Da 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 da. And I'm just like, but I'm refusing to do that. But I don't think I processed why I was refusing to do that. But it just occurred to me recently, like, you've actually been trying your best to show up like authentically and honestly. But then the big question came to me, or that is coming to me, and I've been processing here and there, is does me showing up authentically and honestly with my emotions prevent people from seeing the hope of Jesus in my life? And then I started to think, well, you know what? I really don't know. And so something that I thought, and I could be wrong, and that's why it's always great to have people around us who sometimes can see another side of things. They may not have the full picture, but their perspective might be insightful nonetheless. And I started to realize, while I think even when I'm showing up authentically and honestly, bringing my honest self to the table of, hey, things aren't necessarily going great, I always hope that someone would hear faith in what I'm saying and sense some sort of hope. But seems like with this person that was not what they could take away from my sharings. And I also try not to like do the whole cliche of like, you know what, God is in control. I mean, he is in control, but sometimes I think we just say those things not because we honestly believe it. Yeah, I think I was letting someone into my world quite differently than maybe what they were expecting. And I guess they didn't know they were being let in to see, like, yeah, every day is not great, but I'm making it through, pushing through. Personally, I don't think I've lost my faith. But nevertheless, the other side of that experience was that I kind of doubted it. Like, do I even want to go do a podcast episode today? Like, if someone doesn't think that I have faith to share, then, like, do I have faith to share? Truth is, I have faith to share. I love God. And one thing I love about God is that when we feel so depleted and feel so empty as a vessel, he's like, perfect. Because now I get to pour into you. And what you give people from me, you're honestly just a vehicle. You're just a passage, a vessel through which I pour into others. And so it is okay sometimes to be empty. Not empty on God, but to be empty of like feeling like I don't have the human capacity to achieve this thing right now. But it's in those moments where we realize like, it's okay. We have God. And he's the one that gives us capacity. Yeah, I'm learning that while I wait, I want to show up with people in a way that honors God and glorifies his name. And his name is honored and glorified. And that someone looks at me, I pray someday, sooner than later, and can say, wow, that's really tough, but you seem to have faith in God. And I admire that. Or you have faith in God, and I'm curious to learn more about that. Like, how do you have faith amidst it all? Maybe it's not that I don't have faith, because I know I do. But maybe it's not that I don't have faith that people can see. But maybe it's a challenge for my faith to rise. So I guess I just processed that a little bit more with you all for you to hear, because I think sometimes we're challenged and then we're confused. Like, how do we show up in the world? Is it wrong to be honest and authentic about how we're feeling? Or should we just pretend like everything is well, you know? It's how can we strive for better, because we'll always be waiting. And waiting doesn't get easier, I don't think, because I usually have found in my life thus far, and in the stories I hear of other believers, that the wait seems to look different in each season because it's like their faith has to grow with it. So there are more challenges for their faith to rise. Maybe what was faith, 2022 for me during a hard season doesn't look like faith right now because God wants my faith to rise to the challenge that's before me. Yeah, it can be rough sometimes, but one thing is sure is that even when we're empty or feel empty, that's when God all the more wants to pour into us, to let His light shine through us. So that is it. I don't even know if I did an intro for this podcast. Guys, I'm still getting used to this whole podcasting thing. Thanks for listening to another episode of While I Wait, an Operation Plan Your Wedding podcast. I am your host, Titi Lokwe, and I am so glad that you decided to take some of your time today to listen in. Share this message with a friend and ask them, how do you navigate the question, how are you? That's really the question. So share it with a friend, right? And then the second thing is ask them, hey, I just listened to this podcast episode and I was curious to know how you answer to the question, how are you? Not necessarily what you say, but why you say what you say to the people you share it with. Could be a great conversation starter. And I would say try to get multiple people's perspective. That can be really helpful in having some insights on how people are navigating the question, and think about how you're navigating the question too. And let them know, like, oh, when somebody asks me how I'm just like, oh, I'm good. How are you? And then, think about, why do you say that? Is it because you don't believe someone is really cares to know, or, what is it? And does it matter what someone else thinks? I don't know. Just asking questions. Food for thought, lots of food for thought. Enjoy your day, your week, your month, your year, whenever you're listening to this. With love.